The glint of silver caught her eye. It was the hammer of a revolver, clicking back in the dark. That sound, it felt like ice flooding Lydia Turner's veins, stopping her heart cold. 3 men had her cornered. She was pressed against the rough, weathered wall of the Sweetwater Saloon, the only one in the whole territory. The year was 1878, and being alone after sundown in Montana had just become the biggest mistake of her life. "Well now," the tallest one slurred, his voice a low rumble. "What's a pretty thing like you doing out here all alone?" He grinned. His teeth were a wreck of tobacco stains. His breath was a foul wave of cheap whiskey. He leaned in close, invading her space, making her skin crawl. "Seems to me you're looking for some company." Lydia pulled her thin shawl tighter, the rough wood of the saloon digging into her back. The alley was a dead end, a trap. From inside the saloon she could hear a jaunty piano tune and the boom of drunken laughter. No one would hear her scream. "I'm just passing through," she said. Her voice trembled, but she fought to keep it steady. "My brother will be looking for me." It was a lie. There was no brother, but it was all she had. The man with the revolver just laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Ain't seen no brother," he growled. "Just you." He reached out a grimy hand, his fingers aiming for a strand of auburn hair that had slipped from her bonnet. Lydia flinched back. The men only laughed harder. Her eyes darted around the filthy alley, searching for any way out. There was none. The third man, who'd been silent, shifted his weight, blocking the last sliver of an escape route. He was a wall of muscle and menace. "I don't want any trouble," she pleaded, the fear finally cracking her voice. "Neither do we, darlin'," the tall one purred. "Just a little fun." Then another sound cut through the night, the sharp click of spurs on hard-packed dirt. A deep voice sliced through the tension, calm and cold as a river stone. "The lady doesn't seem to be enjoying your idea of fun." Every head in the alley snapped toward the entrance. A tall figure stood there, a silhouette against the dying embers of the sunset. He was just a shadow, a promise of violence. He took a step forward, and the faint light from the street caught his features. A strong jaw, dark with stubble. Eyes like black coffee, hidden under the brim of a dusty Stetson hat. And he stood in a way that told the world he was perfectly at home with the Colt revolver resting on his hip. He didn't look for trouble. He looked like he ended it. The man with the gun turned his head slightly. "This ain't your business, stranger." But he didn't lower his weapon. He kept Lydia pinned with his cruel gaze. The newcomer took another step, then another. "I'm making it my business." His voice was quiet, almost conversational. But underneath it, there was a core of pure steel. "The lady will be leaving with me now." The 3 men looked at each other, a silent, greasy conversation passing between them. This wasn't what they planned. They'd picked easy prey. They found a wolf instead. "She's mine to protect," the stranger said, his hand now resting on the worn leather grip of his Colt. The words hung in the air, a direct challenge, a line drawn in the dirt. "And I'd take it mighty personal if anything happened to her." The air grew thick, electric. For a heartbeat, Lydia was sure there would be a gunshot. But the man with the revolver saw something in the stranger's eyes, something that made him hesitate. With a curse, he slowly lowered his gun. "Plenty other fun in this town," he muttered, spitting on the ground. He nodded to his friends. And just like that, they backed away, melting into the shadows. They were gone. Lydia let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her knees felt like water. She sagged against the wall, the relief so intense it was painful. The stranger walked toward her, but kept a respectful distance. His voice was gentler now. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Just shaken." She looked up at him, this man who had appeared from the shadows like an avenging angel. "Thank you," she managed. He just tipped his hat. "Prescott Finley. Most folks just call me Prescott. Lydia Turner, she replied, finding her strength again. She even extended a hand. He took it. His grip was firm, his palm calloused from hard work, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Finley. No need, he said, his dark eyes scanning the alley. This town can be rough after dark. May I see you somewhere safer? He paused. To your brother, maybe? Lydia hesitated, a blush creeping up her neck. I'm afraid there is no brother, she admitted. I was just trying to discourage them. A flicker of something, approval, maybe, crossed his face. Smart thinking. Where are you headed? The boarding house on Maple Street, she said, smoothing her dress, trying to pull herself together. I just arrived today. I'm the new school teacher. A real smile touched Prescott's lips, and it changed his whole face. It softened the hard lines, revealing a warmth she hadn't expected. Sweetwater's been waiting for a new teacher. The children will be pleased. They stepped out of the alley and onto the main street. Lanterns were being lit, casting a golden glow on the dusty road. As they walked, Lydia studied her rescuer. He was tall and broad, with a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. His clothes were simple but clean. He wasn't a fancy man from the city, but he wasn't a common cowhand either. There was something else about him, something solid. You're new in town yourself? She asked, noticing the respectful nods he got from people they passed. Been here about 6 months, he said. Bought the livery stable. He guided her around a patch of mud with a light touch on her elbow. Before that, a bit of everything, cattle drives, scouting for the army. He said it simply, as if it were nothing. But Lydia felt a sudden, strange certainty that her life in Sweetwater was about to become far more complicated than she had ever imagined. He was a man with a past. She was a woman running from hers, and their paths had just crashed together in a dark alley. The next morning, Mrs. Whitaker, the cheerful owner of the boarding house, gave Lydia an earful over breakfast. You met Prescott Finley already? She said, her eyes twinkling as she served a pile of bacon. Well, I declare, she lowered her voice. He's a good man, that one. Been raising his daughter all alone since his wife passed. Tragic thing. Lydia nearly choked on her coffee. A daughter. Her rescuer, the quiet, capable man from the alley, was a father, a widower. Somehow that piece of information changed everything. It grounded him. It made him real, and it made him even more intriguing. Later that morning, as Lydia was ringing the schoolhouse bell, she saw him. He was walking toward the school, holding the hand of a slender girl with dark braids and serious, watchful eyes. His eyes. Miss Turner, he said, his voice as calm as it had been in the alley. This is my daughter, Lily. The girl, Lily, gave a small curtsy. Pleased to meet you, ma'am. She was about 11, Lydia guessed, with an intelligence in her gaze that was startling. I'm very happy to have you in my class, Lily, Lydia said, her voice warm. Prescott rested a hand on his daughter's shoulder, a gesture of immense, quiet pride. Lily's got a good head for figures, he said. The girl beamed. Lydia felt a strange pull, watching the two of them together, a father and daughter against the world. After a few more pleasantries, Prescott tipped his hat and left, leaving Lydia with a classroom of 20 children. And one of them had her father's mysterious, dark eyes. The day settled into a routine. Lydia taught reading and arithmetic. She learned the names of the town's children. She grew to love the crisp Montana air. But every morning she felt a little flutter in her stomach when Prescott Finley brought his daughter to school. They'd exchange a polite nod. Sometimes their eyes would meet for a moment too long. A silent question seemed to pass between them. What are you? Who are you? The town's gossip filled in some of the blanks. His wife, Eliza, had died in childbirth 6 years ago. He'd drifted for a while with his baby daughter before landing in Sweetwater. he kept to himself. He worked hard, he was a good father, but there was a wall around him, and Lydia found herself wanting, more than anything, to know what was behind it. Then, 1 week after her arrival, everything changed. Sheriff Brody showed up at the schoolhouse just as she was dismissing the children for the day. He was a big man, with a florid face and eyes that were too small for his head. "Miss Turner," he said, removing his hat. "Mind if I have a word?" He waited until the last child, Lily Finley, had gone. "There's been some trouble," he said, his voice low. "A body was found down by the creek this morning." Lydia felt a chill go through her. "It was one of those drifters," the sheriff continued, watching her closely. "The tall one, from the other night. He meant the man who had threatened her, the one with the whiskey breath and tobacco-stained teeth." "He was shot," the sheriff said flatly. "Once, through the heart. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Miss Turner?" The question was an accusation. "Of course not," she stammered. "Why would I?" "Just asking," Sheriff Brody said, his little eyes narrowing. "You were the last one to have a run-in with him. That we know of." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "That stranger who helped you out. The one they call Prescott. He's a fast man with a gun, I hear." Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. I don't know anything about that." "See that you don't," the sheriff said, a strange warning in his tone. He put his hat back on and left without another word. Lydia stood frozen in the empty schoolhouse. A man was dead. And the sheriff seemed more interested in Prescott Finley than in finding a killer. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the sheriff's accusing eyes. She needed to warn Prescott. Under the cover of darkness, she slipped out of the boarding house and made her way to the livery stable. A single lantern burned inside. She found him in the back, mending a harness, his hands strong and sure. She told him everything, about the dead man, about the sheriff's questions. Prescott listened without saying a word, his face an unreadable mask in the flickering light. When she was finished, he finally looked at her. His eyes were hard. "You didn't tell him I was there," he said. "It wasn't a question. It was a command." "No," she said, "but he already seems to suspect you." "Let him," Prescott said, his voice flat. "Sheriff Brody and I have an understanding." He turned back to his work, his shoulders tense. "You should go, Miss Turner. It's not safe for you to be seen here." It was a dismissal, cold and final. Lydia left, her mind reeling. He hadn't denied it. He hadn't seemed surprised, or angry, or scared. He had simply told her to keep his name out of it. The hero from the alley was gone. In his place was a man with a dark secret, and she was beginning to realize that in Sweetwater, nothing was as it seemed. The town itself was a lie. The next few weeks were a tightrope walk of fear and suspicion. Lydia tried to act normal. She taught her lessons. She graded her papers. But she felt eyes on her everywhere she went. The townspeople were polite, but distant, guarded. They were afraid. But of what? Or who? She watched Prescott when he brought Lily to school. He was the perfect father, gentle, attentive. But she couldn't forget the coldness in his eyes that night at the livery, the steel in his voice. She felt like she was living in two different worlds, the bright, sunny world of the schoolhouse and the dark, shadowy world of secrets that seemed to lurk just beneath the surface of Sweetwater. She decided she had to know more. She used the annual school visit to the livery stable as her excuse. On a sunny Friday afternoon, she led her students across town. Prescott was the perfect host. He showed the children how to shoe a horse, how to mend a saddle. He was patient and kind. He even let little Tommy Davis pet the nose of a huge draft horse, turning the boy's fear into delight. Lydia watched him, her heart torn. Who was this man? The gentle teacher of children, or the cold-eyed killer? While Prescott was distracted with a group of older boys, Lydia slipped away. She told herself she was just looking around, but she knew she was searching. She went into the tack room, a small, dusty space that smelled of leather and oil. Her eyes scanned the shelves, the barrels, the piles of old blankets, and then she saw it. A loose floorboard, just under a workbench. The wood was scuffed, as if it had been moved many times. Her hands trembled as she pried it up. Underneath, wrapped in an oilcloth, was a small leather-bound book, a diary. Her heart pounded as she opened it. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. It wasn't Prescott's. The first entry was dated 2 years before Lily was born. "My dearest Prescott," it began, "I know you burn this journal every year on our anniversary, a promise we made to leave the past behind. But I must write this down. The secret is too heavy to carry alone. He found me, my brother Silas. He knows about the money." Lydia's blood ran cold. "Brother? Money?" She flipped through the pages, her eyes devouring the words. The diary belonged to Eliza, Prescott's dead wife, and it told a story that was nothing like the town gossip. Eliza hadn't been just a school teacher. She came from a family of criminals. Her brother Silas was the leader of a notorious gang of bank robbers. Eliza had wanted out. She had taken the loot from their last robbery, a fortune in Union Pacific bearer bonds, and run away. She met Prescott, fell in love, and tried to build a new life. But her past had found her. The last entry was terrifying. "Silas was here. He says he will not leave without the bonds. He threatened the baby. He threatened you, my love. I told him I'd rather die than let him have them. Prescott, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. The bonds are hidden where the sun doesn't shine. Protect our child. Run. Never stop running." Lydia stared at the page, the words blurring through her tears. Eliza hadn't died in childbirth. It was a lie, a cover story. She had been murdered. "Looking for something, Miss Turner?" The voice came from the doorway. It was Prescott, and all the warmth was gone. His face was a thundercloud, his eyes as hard as granite. He had found her. He walked slowly into the small room, his presence filling the space, sucking all the air out. He didn't look at the diary in her hands. He just looked at her. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your wife," Lydia whispered, her voice shaking. "She didn't die in childbirth." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "No, she didn't." The simple admission hit her like a physical blow. He had lied. To everyone. For 6 years. "The men in the alley," she said, the pieces clicking together with sickening speed. "They weren't drifters." "No," he said. "They worked for her brother Silas. They were here looking for me. For the bonds." He took a step closer. Lydia instinctively backed away, hitting the wall. "The man by the creek," she breathed. "Did you?" Prescott's eyes were black holes. "He got what he deserved. He wasn't admitting to it, but he wasn't denying it either. He was a killer. He had killed one of the men who threatened her, and he said it like he was talking about the weather. "You need to understand," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "I will do whatever it takes to protect my daughter. Whatever it takes." The threat was unmistakable. She knew too much. She had stumbled into the middle of his deadly secret. "What are you going to do to me?" she asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. Prescott just stared at her for a long, terrifying moment. "For now," he said finally, "you're going to put that diary back. You're going to walk out of this room, and you are going to forget everything you just read." He reached out and gently took the diary from her nerveless fingers. His touch was a ghost of the one she remembered from that first night. "If you don't," he added, his voice a razor's edge, "you will put Lily in more danger than you can possibly imagine, and I won't let that happen. Do you understand me, Lydia?" She could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. She was a prisoner. Not of the livery stable, but of his secret. She couldn't run to the sheriff. Sheriff Brody was part of the darkness. She was sure of it now. She had nowhere to go. She was trapped in Sweetwater with a man who was both her savior and her captor. A man she was starting to realize she was terrified of, and a man she was beginning to fall for. Life became a waking nightmare. Every smile from Prescott was a threat. Every kind word felt like a lie. When he brought Lily to school, Lydia would look at him and see a killer, a man living a double life. And yet, she would also see the love in his eyes when he looked at his daughter, the genuine pride, the fierce, desperate protectiveness. She was torn apart inside. One part of her wanted to run, to pack her bags in the middle of the night and disappear. But another part of her couldn't. She couldn't leave Lily. And a small, treacherous voice whispered, she couldn't leave him. Then, a new player arrived in town. He came on the afternoon stagecoach, a man who looked completely out of place in dusty Sweetwater. He wore a tailored suit from the East, polished shoes, and a confident air of authority. He checked into the town's only hotel, and within an hour he was asking questions. He said his name was Peterson, and he was a Pinkerton agent. He was investigating a series of cold cases, old robberies, missing persons, and his questions all seemed to lead back to one man, Prescott Finley. Lydia saw him talking to Sheriff Brody outside the saloon. She saw him interviewing the blacksmith, the store owner, Mrs. Whitaker. He was creating a web, and Prescott was the fly at the center of it. One evening, as Lydia was walking home from the schoolhouse, the agent fell into step beside her. "Miss Turner," he said with a polite, practiced smile. "A moment of your time?" Up close he was handsome, with clear blue eyes and a charming manner. But there was something cold behind the smile. "I understand you're new to Sweetwater," he said. "You have a fresh perspective. I'm interested in your impressions of a certain citizen, Mr. Prescott Finley." Lydia's heart began to beat faster. "He seems like a fine man," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "A good father." "Indeed," the agent said, his eyes boring into hers. "But people who drift from place to place, who use different names, they often have things to hide, don't they?" The shot was so direct, so unexpected, it took her breath away. "I wouldn't know," she said, quickening her pace. The agent easily kept up. "I think you do, Miss Turner. I think you know more than you're letting on." They had reached the gate of her boarding house. She turned to face him, her fear making her bold. "I don't know what you're talking about." His smile vanished. The charming mask fell away, revealing something hard and ugly underneath. "Don't you, Lydia?" he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. He knew her name, her first name, and then he said something that made the world stop turning. "It's been a long time. You look well. The West agrees with you." Lydia stared at him, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing, what she was hearing. The face was older, harder, but the eyes, she knew those eyes. "James," she whispered, the name like ash in her mouth. It wasn't a Pinkerton agent. It was James Abernathy, her fiancé, the man she had fled from in Boston, and he was here, in Sweetwater. "You didn't really think you could just disappear, did you?" James said, his voice dripping with condescension. He looked her up and down, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "A school teacher. How quaint. Did you think you could just erase the past?" Lydia couldn't speak. Her throat was closed with terror. James wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to find her. He was the past she had run from. He was the reason she was in Sweetwater, but it was worse than she ever imagined. "What do you want, James?" she finally managed to choke out. "What do I want?" He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Oh, Lydia, I don't want you. That ship has sailed. No, I'm here for the same thing you are." He leaned in closer, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. I'm here for the Union Pacific bonds." Lydia's blood turned to ice. You know about the bonds?" "Of course I know," he sneered. "You weren't as clever as you thought when you stole my research and ran. It took me months, but I pieced it together. The outlaw gang, the missing fortune, the dead school teacher wife, and her grieving husband who disappeared with his daughter." He stepped back, looking pleased with himself. "It all leads here, to Sweetwater, to him, to Prescott Finley." It was a nightmare, a collision of her two secret lives, the one she had run from and the one she had stumbled into. And James was standing right at the intersection. "So here's how this is going to work," he said, his tone turning sharp and businesslike. "You are going to help me. You're close to him. He trusts you. You will find out where he's hidden those bonds." "And if I don't?" Lydia challenged, a spark of her old fire returning. James's eyes went cold. "If you don't," he said softly, "I will tell your Mr. Finley all about you. About how his gentle schoolteacher isn't so gentle. I'll tell him about the money you helped me embezzle in Boston. About the life you were really living." He paused, letting the threat sink in. "And then I'll tell Sheriff Brody. I'm sure he'd be very interested to know that a wanted woman is teaching the town's children." He smiled that cold, dead smile again. "You're trapped, Lydia. You work for me now." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing at the gate, her world shattered into a million pieces. She was caught between two monsters, a killer who had saved her life, and the man she had once promised to marry, who had come to destroy it. That night, Lydia didn't go back to the boarding house. She went to the livery. She had to know the truth, the whole truth. She found Prescott in his small living quarters, reading to Lily by the light of a lamp. The scene was so peaceful, so normal, it felt like a punch to the gut. He sent Lily to bed, then turned to Lydia. He must have seen the desperation on her face. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. "The Pinkerton agent," she said, her voice trembling. "He's not an agent. His name is James Abernathy. He was my fiancé in Boston." Prescott's expression didn't change, but a new tension entered his body. He became utterly still. "And he knows about the bonds," she finished, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He knows who you are. He knows about Eliza. He wants me to help him find them." She finally looked him in the eye, all her fear and confusion boiling over. "I need you to tell me everything, Prescott. No more lies. Who are you?" He was silent for a long time, studying her face in the lamplight. Then he finally spoke. "My name isn't Prescott Finley," he said softly. It was another blow, another lie. "It's Jacob Thorne." He told her everything. He filled in the gaps from Eliza's diary. He had been a scout for the army, a man who knew how to disappear. He met Eliza in a small town in Kansas. He didn't know about her family, not at first. He just knew he loved her. When her past caught up to her, when her brother Silas came calling, Jacob had tried to get her and their unborn child away, but Silas's men had found them. "It wasn't childbirth," Jacob said, his voice raw with a grief that was still fresh after 6 years. "Silas's right-hand man. He cornered her. She fought him. He killed her. I found them. I found her." He closed his eyes for a moment, the pain of the memory etched on his face. "I killed him," he whispered, "the man who murdered my wife. I killed him with my bare hands, and then I took my daughter and I ran." He had been running ever since, changing his name, moving from town to town, always looking over his shoulder. He chose Sweetwater because it was remote, quiet. He thought they would be safe. But the men in the alley... "Silas found us," he finished. "He's not going to stop. Not until he gets the bonds, or until I'm dead." Lydia listened, her heart aching for him, for the tragedy of his life. He wasn't a cold-blooded killer. He was a man avenging his wife, a father protecting his child. The bonds, she said. Where are they? A faint, grim smile touched his lips. Where the sun doesn't shine. That's what Eliza wrote. He looked around the small, simple room. She meant right here, in the open, hidden in plain sight. They're sewn into the lining of Lily's winter coat, the one she's outgrown. It's been in the back of her closet for 2 years. It was so simple, so brilliant. No one would ever think to look there. So what do we do? Lydia asked. James, my ex-fiancé, he's not going to wait long, and Silas is coming. Jacob looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a new, terrifying resolve. We don't run anymore, he said. We end this, here, in Sweetwater. He walked to a locked chest in the corner of the room. He opened it. Inside, nestled in worn leather, were 2 gleaming revolvers and a rifle. This was not Prescott Finley, the gentle blacksmith. This was Jacob Thorne, the Army scout, the man who had survived. There's one more thing you need to know, he said, his voice grim as he checked the action on the rifle. Sheriff Brody, he's not on my side. He's not on your side. He's on Silas's payroll. He has been from the beginning. Lydia stared at him, the final piece of the puzzle locking into place. Sweetwater wasn't a refuge. It was a cage, and the wolves were coming. The rain started a week later. At first, it was a welcome relief from the summer heat. But it didn't stop. For 3 days and 3 nights, the sky opened up and dumped a deluge on the Montana territory. The creek, normally a gentle stream, turned into a raging, muddy torrent. It began to swallow its banks. The lower part of town started to flood. Water lapped at the doors of the general store. The street became a river. But for Lydia and Jacob, the rising water was the least of their worries. It was the perfect cover. Chaos, confusion, a town in crisis. The perfect time for Silas and his gang to make their move. They worked in a frantic, silent partnership. Jacob armed them, using the weapons from his chest. He gave Lydia a small pistol, showing her how to use it, his hands firm and steady on hers. You don't aim to kill, he told her, his voice low and intense. You aim to stop the threat. You just point, and you pull the trigger. You don't think. They barricaded the small house behind the livery. They brought Lily in from the schoolhouse, telling her it was a game to keep her from being afraid. The girl, with her father's sharp eyes, knew it wasn't a game, but she didn't cry. She just watched her father, her face pale and serious. The first attack came at dusk. They used the flood as a distraction. 2 of Silas's men came in a boat pretending to be rescuers. Sheriff Brody was with them. Finley! The sheriff shouted over the roar of the rain. You in there? The Wilkins farm is cut off. I need your help. It was a trap. Jacob looked at Lydia. Stay here. Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. He went out into the storm, a rifle held low at his side. Lydia watched from the window, her heart in her throat. She saw Jacob talk to the sheriff. She saw him get in the boat, and then she saw one of the other men raise a pistol. A gunshot cracked through the storm. Jacob dove sideways, out of the boat and into the churning flood water. The battle for Sweetwater had begun. Lydia screamed as Jacob disappeared beneath the brown, swirling water. The man in the boat fired again, the bullet splashing harmlessly into the torrent. Sheriff Brody shouted something, his face a mask of fury. From the window, Lydia saw Jacob surface 20 feet away, behind the water trough. He came up with the rifle already at his shoulder. He fired. One of the men in the boat cried out and slumped over. The sheriff and the other man fired back, their bullets thudding into the walls of the livery. Lydia grabbed Lily, pulling her away from the window and into the back room. Stay down, she ordered, her voice shaking. She grabbed the small pistol Jacob had given her. It felt heavy and alien in her hand. The gunshots outside continued, a terrifying, sporadic exchange. This was real. Men were trying to kill the man she loved. They would kill her and Lily next if they got inside. Suddenly, the back door splintered. Someone was trying to break in. Lydia's blood ran cold. They had flanked them. She pushed Lily under the bed. Don't make a sound, she whispered. She stood by the door, the pistol raised in her trembling hands, just as Jacob had shown her. The door burst open. A huge, bearded man stood there, silhouetted against the gray, rainy twilight. He held a long knife in his hand. He grinned when he saw her. "The boss wants the girl," he growled, taking a step inside. "But he said I could have some fun with you first." Lydia didn't think. She just reacted. She pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening in the small room. The gun kicked back, bruising her hand. The man stared at her, a look of shock on his face. A dark red stain blossomed on his chest. He took one more step, then crashed to the floor. Lydia stared at the body, her mind blank with shock. She had just killed a man. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, raising the pistol again. It was Jacob. He was soaked to the bone, mud-streaked, with a wild, dangerous look in his eyes. He looked at the dead man on the floor, then at Lydia. "You did good," he said, his voice rough. There was no time for shock, no time for horror. "They have the whole place surrounded," he said, reloading his rifle with quick, efficient movements. "That was just the first wave. Silas will be here himself soon." He glanced around the small, vulnerable house. "We can't stay here." Just then, another voice shouted from outside, a familiar, hated voice. "Lydia, it's me, James. I can help you." It was her ex-fiancé. He was out there, in the middle of a war zone. "Don't trust him," Lydia said immediately. "I don't trust anyone," Jacob growled, "but he might be a useful distraction." He peered through the window. "Brody's pulled back for now, but there are more of them moving in from the north." He looked at Lydia. "There's only one way out. We have to get to the church. It's on higher ground. It's built like a fortress." "How?" Lydia asked, her voice desperate. "We'll never make it across the street." "We don't go across," Jacob said, a grim light in his eyes. "We go under." He pointed to a trap door in the floor she had never noticed before. "Old storm cellar. It connects to a drainage tunnel that runs all the way to the back of the general store. It'll be flooded, but there should be enough air to breathe." It was a crazy, desperate plan, but it was the only one they had. Jacob pulled Lily out from under the bed. The girl was terrified, but she didn't make a sound. He hugged her tight. "I need you to be brave, little bird," he whispered. "Braver than you've ever been." He pried open the trap door. A rush of foul, stagnant air came up to meet them. Below was a black, watery hole. "Go," Jacob said to Lydia. "I'll be right behind you with Lily." Lydia took a deep breath and descended into the darkness. The water was icy cold, up to her chest. The tunnel was narrow and slick with slime. It was the stuff of nightmares. But they were alive. For now. The tunnel was hell. The water was rising and the air was thick and foul. Lily was whimpering in Jacob's arms, but they kept moving, slipping and sliding through the darkness. After what felt like an eternity, they saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. The end of the tunnel. It came out in the cellar of the general store, just as Jacob had said. They pushed open the grate and climbed out, gasping for fresh air. They were covered in mud and filth, but they were out of the immediate line of fire. The general store was empty. The owners had fled to higher ground. Jacob crept to the front window and peered out. The street was a war zone. Silas's men were using the floodwaters for cover, moving from building to building. They were in a firefight with a few of the townsmen, who had barricaded themselves in the hotel. And then Lydia saw James. He was with Sheriff Brody, crouched behind an overturned wagon. He was holding a rifle. He had chosen his side. "He's with them," she said, her voice filled with disgust. "He wants the bonds," Jacob said grimly. "He'll do anything to get them." Suddenly, the front door of the store burst open. Sheriff Brody stood there, his face red with exertion, a shotgun in his hands. "It's over, Thorne," he snarled. "Give me the girl and the bonds." Jacob pushed Lydia and Lily behind him, raising his rifle. You'll have to kill me first, Brody. That can be arranged, the sheriff said, leveling the shotgun. But before he could fire, another figure appeared in the doorway behind him. It was Silas. Lydia knew him instantly from the description in Eliza's diary. He had the same dark hair, the same determined jaw. But his eyes were cold and dead, like a snake's. He held a pistol in his hand, aimed not at Jacob, but at Sheriff Brody. "Thank you for your help, Sheriff," Silas said, his voice smooth and cultured, a terrifying contrast to his violent reputation. "But your services are no longer required." He fired. The blast was deafening. Sheriff Brody stared down at his chest in disbelief, then crumpled to the floor. Silas stepped over the body, his dead eyes locking on Jacob. "Brother-in-law," he said with a mock smile, "it's been a long time." He looked past Jacob, at Lily. "And this must be my niece. She has her mother's eyes." The casual mention of his murdered sister made Jacob's whole body tense with rage. "You're not laying a hand on her, Silas." "Oh, I don't want the girl," Silas said, his smile widening. "I want what my sister stole from me. Give me the bonds, Jacob, and I'll let you and the girl walk away. I give you my word." "Your word is worth nothing," Jacob spat. "Perhaps," Silas conceded, "but consider your alternative." He gestured with his pistol toward the street. Outside, his men had won. The townsmen's resistance had been silenced. James Abernathy stood beside two of Silas's thugs, looking triumphant. They were surrounded, outnumbered. It was over. "The bonds are in Lily's winter coat," Jacob said, his voice heavy with defeat. "In the livery." Silas laughed. "Clever Eliza, always hiding things in plain sight. James," he called out, "go fetch a coat from the stable." As James and one of the men hurried off, Silas kept his gun trained on Jacob. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, Jacob. Years of it. But business is business." A few minutes later, James returned, holding the small, worn coat. He handed it to Silas, who felt the lining. He pulled out a pocket knife and slit the fabric. A thick bundle of bearer bonds fell to the floor. He had it. He had the fortune. "A pleasure doing business with you," Silas said, scooping up the bonds. He started to back out of the door. "You're just going to let us go?" Jacob asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Silas paused in the doorway. "Oh," he said, as if he had forgotten something. "No." He raised his pistol, but at that exact moment Lily screamed. She pointed toward the back of the store. "Papa, look!" Everyone turned, and in that split second of distraction, Jacob moved. He wasn't a blacksmith anymore. He was a soldier, an avenger. He launched himself at Silas, a primal roar of fury tearing from his throat. The two men crashed to the floor in a desperate, violent struggle. James Abernathy, seeing his chance, made a grab for the bonds that had scattered on the floor. Lydia didn't hesitate. She ran at him, all the fear and rage of the past few weeks fueling her. She kicked and clawed and screamed, a wildcat fighting for her life, for her family. The store descended into chaos. Gunshots, shouts, the crash of breaking glass. Jacob and Silas were locked in a fight to the death. Silas was bigger, but Jacob was faster, more desperate. Lydia managed to knock the bonds from James's hand. He struck her, a vicious backhand that sent her sprawling. He lunged for the bonds again, his face twisted with greed. But he never reached them. A small figure darted out from behind the counter. It was Lily. In her hands, she held a heavy cast-iron skillet from the store's shelves. With a cry of rage that was a perfect echo of her father's, she swung it with all her might. It connected with the back of James's head with a sickening crack. He collapsed without a sound. At the same time, Jacob finally got the upper hand on Silas. He wrested the gun away and slammed Silas's head against the hard wooden floor, again and again. When it was over, Silas lay still. The silence that fell was more shocking than the noise. It was done. Jacob stumbled to his feet, breathing heavily. He looked at Lydia, at the unconscious form of James. at the dead body of Silas. Then he looked at his daughter, standing there, fierce and brave, still holding the skillet. He rushed to her, wrapping her in his arms. "It's okay, little bird," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's over. We're safe." Lydia went to them, putting her arms around both of them. They stood there for a long moment, a broken, battered, but victorious family, in the middle of the wreckage, as the rain finally began to stop outside. The floodwaters receded, the sun came out, and the town of Sweetwater began to pick up the pieces. The story that emerged was a simple one, polished for public consumption. A gang of outlaws, led by the notorious Silas Gray, had used the flood to attack the town. They were foiled by the heroic actions of the local blacksmith, Jacob Thorne, and a few brave citizens. The corrupt sheriff had died in the line of duty. A visiting businessman from the east had been tragically caught in the crossfire. No one asked too many questions. The U.S. Marshals who came to investigate were more than happy to recover the stolen Union Pacific bonds and close a very old, very bloody case. They offered Jacob a substantial reward. He turned it down. "All I want," he told them, "is a clean slate and to be left in peace." His actions in avenging his wife were deemed justifiable. The name Jacob Thorne was cleared, but he decided to remain Prescott Finley, the man who had built a life, however false, in Sweetwater. James Abernathy woke up with a fractured skull and no memory of the final battle. Lydia told the marshals he was a victim, not a villain. It was an act of mercy she wasn't sure he deserved. They put him on a stagecoach back east, a broken man. Life in Sweetwater slowly returned to something resembling normal. The livery was rebuilt. The schoolhouse was cleaned. The dead were buried. One warm evening, a month after the flood, Lydia and Prescott stood on the porch of their small house. Lily was inside, asleep. The night was quiet, peaceful. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," Lydia said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. Prescott wrapped his arm around her. "Me neither." They had been through fire and flood. They had faced down their pasts and won. "You know," Lydia said, a small smile playing on her lips, "when I first came to this town, I thought I was running away from my life." She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "But I wasn't. I was running toward it." He lowered his head and kissed her. A long, slow kiss filled with all the things they had survived. It was a promise of a new beginning, built on a foundation of hard-won truth. They weren't perfect. They had scars. But they were survivors. They were a family. And they were finally home. What started with a glint of silver in a dark alley had ended here, in the quiet peace of a Montana night. It just goes to show you that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't gold or bonds, but the courage you find when you have something and someone worth fighting for. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. You never know what secrets are hiding in the next town down the road.